am ready to finish my donut teapot form. So I threw my donut form and I trimmed it in the round, and then I went back in with a cleanup tool and did a lot of reductive work that I refined with a stiff bristled paintbrush and a sponge. So then I went in and I cut a lid out that related to the surface, and I held the cleanup tool at a 45-degree angle to cut that lid out. I'll then be attaching a decorative coil knob to the top, but that comes later. Let's talk about spouts. So if you are unfamiliar with how to throw a spout, I would encourage you to watch my throwing off of a mound spouts demonstration, and that walks you through the throwing process, because in this video I'm just going to talk about attachment. So I want to attach a spout towards the top of the form and at an angle. It should not jet straight out from the form, or when you pour the water in the teapot, the water is going to flow right out the spout. It needs to be angled up. So I have my spout cut down to size. It is a lot smaller in attachment than it was when thrown. It's best to start off with a larger spout than you need and then cut it down from there. And then also notice that when I cut it off at an angle so that when I attach it, even to a curved form, it has a nice angle to it. I also chose to create kind of a teardrop in my spout. So the water will flow out of this little edge quite nicely, but this shape also mimics some of the shapes that I have on the surface. So what I'm going to do is hold that spout up, and I'm going to sketch on with a cleanup tool or needle tool where I'm going to need to crosshatch and where I'm going to need to cut the hole, because you've got to have a hole in the side of the teapot connecting the spout, or your liquid will struggle to come out of the teapot. So there I've sketched on a very rough line of where my spout will be attached. Now you can either use a hole punch to make your hole, or you can drill with a cleanup tool. You want to make sure that you're doing all of this work at the leather hard stage. Do not try to attach parts if it's getting too dry. And you'll be able to tell if it's getting too dry if it has a light dusty cast to it. If you attach parts too dry, then they're not going to stay together. They're just going to crack later. So now I have my hole drilled, I'm ready to attach. So now you may use a cross-hatching tool if you have one available, or a scoring tool. You can also use a cleanup tool to get cross-hatched very deep. Make sure you're dipping that tool in water. Remember, we do not want cracking in the connections. So we want lots of water, and we want sloppy mark making. That's a good thing for cross-hatching. So look at how torn up that surface is. That's what we want for connection. So I'm going to dip the end of my spout in and do the very same thing for the spout. I'm going to really tear up that edge for a nice sloppy connection. I know that sounds crazy that I'm saying to do something sloppy, but you'll clean it up later. So now I have some nice sloppy edges there. I'm going to dip that spout edge in water one more time, in and out real quick, and then I can press it on. We want to make sure that it's lined up properly. You are now committing to that spout placement. Okay. So now I'm going to take a little bit of time with the cleanup tool and smooth and refine that connection, and then I'm going to get my base attached and then work on my handle. Now I'm ready to attach my base. So I threw a base very similar to how I throw a spout, a tiny baseless cylinder. So it will attach to the bottom of the donut teapot. I have cross-hatched anywhere I'm going to be making contact. I'm going to dip this in and out of water as my slip and then press it on. You want to make sure that your attachment is centered so that the teapot will not lean. So this is roughly how it will look. So I'm going to spend some time now with the cleanup tool refining that bottom edge. Notice that when I attach the spout, I integrated little subtle areas of the design. I'm going to do the same thing with the base. However, I do want the spout, base, and handle, as well as the knob of the lid, to contrast the teapot a little bit. So I'm not going to completely texturize the surface. So I want both contrast and unity in this teapot. So now I have attached my base and I added very subtle decorative elements to it. My spout is attached, my lid's cut out. I'm now ready to work on my handle. I like to store my work when it's in progress on these little air pockets that you get in packages that are shipped. So as they are coming home, hang on to them because you could really use them in your studio space. So I'm going to slide this teapot back in a bag while I'm pulling a handle because I really want to make sure that that form remains leather hard until I'm ready to attach. So as a little handle review, you need a paper towel to pull handles, a bowl of water, and your clay in the shape of a carrot. So whenever I'm pulling handles, I'm going to focus on creating a tube shape, and I'm going to make that handle longer than I think that I need. In terms of thickness for a handle for a teapot, it's going to be different than a mug because it is a much larger form. So I'm going to relate that thickness to the width of the spout and or the width of the teapot itself because I'm doing a donut form. So I want to focus right now on creating a tube of clay. So notice that I'm using the center of the circle of my hand, not my fingers, to initially pull this handle. If there is a thick base, just go ahead and scissor finger pinch that off of there and continue to pull down, creating a nice tube of clay. It's okay if you have some variation of width. I'm thicker up here, thinner there. That will actually flow really nicely when I attach it. So now I'm going to flatten out the handle using scissor fingers in one direction only. This flattens and widens the handle. I recommend pulling 2 handles so that you have a couple to choose from and you have one to play around with. So in this handle shape, I'm wider here, thinner there, wider there. I'm actually really happy with that because the wide edges will attach to the teapot. So now I'm going to carefully lay that handle flat, scissor finger cut it off, and I'm ready to pull my second handle. Remember, do not rotate the clay while your hand is wrapped around. You want to make sure that you're rotating when you're dipping your hand. So again, this is my second handle. So that I have a couple to choose from. I'm going to pull a little bit more clay down here to get more length. Because again, this is a teapot, so we want to make sure it's a long enough handle. I'm ready to scissor finger. So now we have a very appropriate width and depth to the handle. I'm going to lay that flat. Now, I am going to pull the knob for the lid of my teapot. So I'm going to do a little miniature pulled handle to relate to the handle that I'm attaching to the spout. So this is going to be a little itty bitty baby handle. I want unity through repetition in the form, and so that's why I'm choosing to pull it rather than just roll a coil. Scissor finger this itty bitty baby handle, and you can see how tiny that is. This is going to be the knob. I'm going to get a little bit thinner, and then I'm going to lay this little baby handle flat as well. Now I'm going to take this over to the hairdryer, stiffen it up, and then I'm going to show you how I attach. For this next step, I want to go ahead and think about how I want this handle to transition in connection to the teapot. I have a lot of spirals and curves on the surface, so I'm going to do something very unusual, and I'm going to round the edge of this prior to connection. I'm not going to be using both of these ends, but I'm going to go ahead and round one end a while, and then you'll see that I'm going to end up shortening the handle prior to attaching, so then I'll round the other end. But I know that this end is going to be one end that attaches to the teapot itself. So now I'm going to go ahead and shape this handle prior to attaching it to the teapot. That's what makes this very different than attaching a handle to a mug. I also want to do a little curlicue in the middle of this handle like this to relate to all the spirals that I have going on this form. I'm going to also mimic that donut curve, the shape. So this is the general shape that I'm going after with this form. Before I attach, I want to see if this is going to look proportionate to the teapot form. So I'm going to take the teapot out of my Ziploc bag, and I'm just going to hold it up to the form itself. And I can see that it is the appropriate size. That curlicue really relates well to the surface design. So now I can go ahead and round this other end because I do not need to cut it down after all. So I'm going to go ahead and get that step done. So now we're ready to attach the handle to the form. I have stiffened the handle with the hairdryer to a point that I'm able to stand it upright without it collapsing. I then held the handle up to my teapot to figure out where I wanted to attach it. I could make the choice to attach it centered or offset it. I have chosen to offset the handle because I think that will relate very nicely to what's going on with the spout and the lid. So I've cross-hatched and slipped both the edge of the handle as well as the teapot itself. So now I'm going to press the attachment firmly together, putting a lot of pressure on the form. You should see the cross-hatching and slip areas actually starting to seep out. That's how you know the attachment is going to be strong. So now I have attached the handle, and I'll show you what that lid's going to look like on the form. I also have the knob on there. So now I just have some refining to do. I need to refine the edge of the handle. I've already refined the spout. I need to go in there and I'm going to refine inside the spout. Remember, a stiff bristle paintbrush is really excellent for refining edges. So if you have a stiff bristle brush laying around, I strongly recommend using that for refinement purposes. So I'm going to finish my refining process, and I will let this dry slowly and I'll be done.